This is lesson 8. The text for today is pretty long. 22 verses are printed in the lesson material, and that means it'll take quite a bit of time simply reading the text and working through the text itself. So maybe the leader should keep it moving along and maybe also already note some key themes as they're encountered along the way. Themes that can become topics of conversation and application later on. Those themes would include things like disunity and pride, and how a focus on the gospel centered on Jesus helps us combat these. And then, of course, there's the whole matter of wisdom and foolishness. Which is which, of course, depends on who's evaluating them. In last week's lesson, two kinds of wisdom were contrasted: the spiritual wisdom from above and the devilish wisdom found in the world. James refers to them as two kinds of wisdom, though, of course, only the first really deserves to be called wisdom. In this lesson, we get Paul's way of talking about this. There's worldly wisdom, and then there's God's wisdom. From the worldly perspective, Christians look sometimes a bit foolish. The Corinthian believers look foolish. The apostles who bring them the good news look foolish. Even the gospel itself, here called the message of the cross, seems like foolishness. But that's only because the world's standard of judgment is all wrong. There's a popular song today called God's Crazy People. Listen to it. It's pretty funny, but it's pretty right on. God uses the so-called foolish gospel to preach to fools and have it preached by fools to create a living, holy community that puts to shame the so-called wisdom of this world. The world's so-called wisdom leads to disunity and pride and promiscuity, three things that were rampant in Corinth and sometimes also in the church. The disunity theme is introduced when Paul talks about how the Corinthian Christians are pitting the apostles against each other, valuing one, disparaging the other. The pride theme is introduced by revealing how people claimed a greater spirituality if they were baptized by the right person or if they supported the best leader. Foolishness, says the inspired writer. A gospel that's centered on Jesus, his life, his death, his resurrection. Such a gospel might appear foolish to the world, but it leads us to value the diversity of the body of Christ and to humbly play our role in helping it be united and holy. The Corinthians disagreed about a lot of things: belief systems, ethical norms, appropriate use of spiritual gifts, the interface between gospel and culture. Not so different from the challenges the church faces today. When I wrote this lesson, I ended with this sentence: we will never find church unity if our dominant approach is to try to convince others that we are right. But if we center on Jesus and his mission to bring peace and justice and salvation to the world, we will find a unity that can hold us together and strengthen us despite areas of continuing disagreement. If I were teaching this lesson, I'd use many of the questions that Steve Pardini provides to help explore the meaning of the text. But I'd also make sure there's plenty of time to explore the ways in which little has really changed from the first century till now. Yes, we are in a very different time and place, but we face so many of the same challenges the Corinthians faced. And I would want to show how Paul's inspired advice can also help us. Stop picking your favorite leaders. Deal with the pride that puts you above your brothers and sisters. Focus on what is at the center: Jesus. Be prepared to look foolish to the world. God is at work creating something wonderful. My pastor sometimes refers to God's clever mischief. Perhaps God's mischief made sure that the letter of 1 Corinthians was included in the New Testament canon. The church in Corinth was so immature, so misguided on a lot of things, so far off base in the way that it thought about leadership and, well, a lot of other topics as well. So unclear even about the nature of the gospel, that we should at least take comfort in this: as challenging as we may find church life in our context, we're not as messed up as they were in Corinth. So if there was hope for them, there's hope for us. When God's power transforms us, and creates a loving community, we don't look so foolish after all. That's one of the points emphasized in this lesson. If I were teaching it, I'd invite participants to reflect on those times and places where they were led to make a decision or hold a conviction that really did seem foolish by worldly standards, but in the end proved to be something that God could use and that provided great blessing.